Hey, Larken Rose here. One of the most common things I hear when I've been explaining why authoritarian power is inherently illegitimate and immoral and all that fun stuff is people saying, well, what are your solutions? How will everything work? How are we going to do this? What about my roads? And what about justice? And how do we deal with scary people? And all these things. And on the one hand, they're legitimate questions, because if somebody grew up always thinking that authority was going to handle everything and that as long as you can dial 911 you don't have to think and act like a grown-up, it's understandable that they're going to have a hard time imagining living in a world where there isn't that, where there isn't someone else to defer to, where there isn't a grown-up handling all these things, and then the rest of us have to start acting like grown-ups. So there are lots of resources that explain that type of thing. I did a series about how justice could be administered in the absence of a ruling class, and the aspects of sort of old English law all the way up to the present day that actually have something sane as their basis. Things like presumption of innocence and due process and all that. So I've talked about those things plenty, and other people have talked about them plenty. But there's a first step that people have to understand when they're pondering the concept of a stateless society, a society without a ruling class, which is you don't get to pretend to be a child anymore. You are responsible for what you do. So if somebody asks me, well, if there wasn't government, what would we do about this? As I've explained before, my first response is usually, well, what would you do about it? What would you feel okay doing about it? And the thing is, most people have never thought in those terms. They've never had to consider it. In fact, they've been deliberately trained to not consider it. I mean, all through school, it's like, don't take it. If anything goes wrong, you go find an authority figure to settle it. Like if you're being attacked and you defend yourself, well, you're both in the wrong. You should have went and, found an authority figure. People are, and then after school, you can't take the law into your own hands. You have to keep thinking and acting like a child and let representatives of a parasitical ruling class administer justice, which they do an absolutely horrendous job at. Even in the case where there really is like a criminal with a victim, and then most of the time agents of the state are the criminals. They are the aggressors victimizing and robbing other people. But one of the main selling points of statism is that it allows people to imagine that they can get out of responsibility by deferring to an authority. Well, it's not up to me to decide. I'm just going to call the authorities and tell them what I saw and give them the facts, and they have to make all the moral decisions of what to do. And so the point of this video is to encourage people to start practicing thinking like a grown-up. Start practicing figuring out what you believe and what you think would be rational and justified in a whole bunch of different scenarios if you couldn't just defer to government. If you didn't have some authority you could call so that you don't have to worry about anything. Because in a free society, all us normal grown-ups, we're all there is. To solve a problem, that's on me, and it's on you, and it's on everybody else. Now, you don't have to know the solution to every problem. You don't have to come up with a solution to every problem. But you and you alone are the ultimate arbiter of what you think is justified and what you go along with. There is no such thing in a society that's given up the superstition of authority as just following orders, so it's okay. One of the foundations of giving up the cult of authority is giving up the idea that if you just do what some supposed authority says, then you're not responsible. Well, I don't make the law, I just enforce it. Well, you're choosing to enforce it. And to pretend that you're not morally responsible because you're just mindlessly following orders like a robot doesn't make it okay. It makes it immoral and makes you a coward. And everybody who acts as a law enforcer for government is a thug and a coward. a thug because they will initiate violence if the law tells them to, and a coward because they will take no personal responsibility for having done that. They'll just say, well, I was just enforcing the law. I was just obeying orders. I was just doing as I was told. You can't blame me. Actually, yes, we can. You are absolutely the only one to blame for what you do. That will still be true in a stateless society, which hopefully will create an incentive for people to think things through. Either think things through ahead of time, like, well, what would I do in this scenario, and what would be justified, in response to this? Or at least when something comes up, don't just say, well, I just did whatever I felt like and that was good enough and you can't blame me for anything. Yeah, we can. The whole world can blame you for whatever you choose to do. Because you're you. You have free will. You have the power of choice. And what you do is completely on you. There's nobody else to try to throw it off on like there is now, which not only law enforcers, but voters and law-abiding taxpayers constantly push it off on somebody else. Of just, well, there was this problem, but it's not up to me to handle. I just called the police. It's like you knew something horrible was happening. You knew the police weren't helping, and yet you chose to be a useless coward and let evil occur because all you could think was, well, I'm not authority. It's up to somebody else. So I strongly encourage everybody hearing this to start exercising your brain in the direction of, well, what would I feel okay doing in any given situation? Start imagining scenarios. Well, if there was someone running around with an axe, what do I think is justified? And would I be willing to be the one to do it? Because if you're someone who says, well, if somebody does this, I think that should happen to them. Okay, would you feel okay if you were the one that had to do it to them? Like if you're somebody who says, well, I don't think people should smoke pot, so I'm all in favor of them being arrested and thrown in a cage. Okay, would you feel justified doing that yourself if you didn't have authority and law to hide behind? If you couldn't just be a coward and ask somebody else to do the thuggery for you and ask somebody else to assume complete responsibility for what you wanted them to do? If you didn't have that to hide behind, how would you behave? And you can think up a whole bunch of challenging, complicated scenarios. And it's good to do that. It's good to exercise your brain and learn to think like a grown-up. Well, if there's somebody accused of something really horrible, like, wouldn't you, as just a decent human being, start by saying, well, we have to figure out if he really did it. And, like, we don't want to punish somebody based on somebody else making something up. So, okay, how do we make sure? And what are the standards of that? Now, I'm not saying you have to figure this out for yourself, because there's lots of people, and this goes back centuries, who've written great explanations on how justice can be implemented. Like I was saying, that the principles of presumption of innocence, it's like we're not going to retaliate against you until we're all the way sure that you actually did the bad thing. If some random person said you did something bad, we're not going to, become an angry mob and lynch you and then find out, oh, they lied. Oh, whoops. So the concept of presumption of innocence, the concept of due process, where you're not going to advocate anything be done to anybody until you actually make sure what happened. And that includes going through the evidence. It also includes allowing the accused to respond to the evidence and to question people who are accusing him and go, wait a minute, this guy said you did something. You probably should have the right to say whether you did it or not and respond and challenge the accusations against you, because we as just people, if you're going to be a decent human being, you should try pretty hard to not retaliate against somebody who didn't do anything wrong, because then you're not even retaliating. You're just hurting an innocent person because somebody else lied about it, or even because somebody else was mistaken. And it isn't just the matter of justice. It's like helping the poor. Well, how would we help take care of the poor if we didn't have government? Why are you asking me? Like, I already do to people I know, especially when I'm in a position to do that, which is kind of rare these days. But when somebody asks me because they haven't thought about it before, I can sympathize and I can understand that. And there's lots and lots of people who have written, a million different books on how do we care for the poor without government? How do we deal justice without government? How do we defend against like a huge invading army without government, and so on and so forth. So if what you're looking for is other ideas to read about and then gauge them against your own conscience and understanding, cool, that's excellent. But if what you're looking for is somebody who will take the responsibility away from you and say, don't worry, you just blindly obey, and I will tell you how everything will be handled, then you're just trying to be an irresponsible child. Don't do that. Accept that you're a grown-up. Accept that you are already responsible for what you choose to do and for what you choose not to do. If there's somebody hurting or starving or something in your front yard and you go, well, that's somebody else's problem. Well, is it? Like, you have to decide for yourself what you're willing to do and what you think you really need to do, what you're obligated to do. That's up to you. And no matter what happens, you can't push that on somebody else, including if you read some brilliant treatise about, how justice could be administered without a ruling class. If you go, well, we're just going to go through the steps in this book, and if it goes badly, I'll say, well, I was just using the steps in this book. You decided to use the steps in that book. It's still on you. So it really is practice being a grown-up and, first of all, accepting that what you do is on you. It's your responsibility. Now, you can take input and ideas from a million different sources and weigh them with your own judgment and your own conscience and say, well, that guy says if somebody gets caught stealing a Snickers, we should, burn him alive in center square. And you can either say, oh, okay, well, he said that, so let's do that. Or you can say, that's messed up. That's not okay. That's not what we should do. And then keep looking. So other people can give you ideas, but it's still up to you at the end of the day. There is no way to defer your moral responsibility to somebody else. And just grasping that fact is one of the most important steps in transferring from a ward of the state, a subject of a ruling class, to an actual grown-up, a responsible adult, is accepting it's up to me. What I do and what I say is on me. I'm responsible for that. Whether I do something or choose not to do something, that's all on me. And that is one of the main things that people hope government will help them escape, is the responsibility of that. So they can just, I put my blinders on and I'm just going through life doing my little thing and nothing else is my problem, because that's what authority's for. So if I live in some big city and somebody's screaming for help right next to me, I don't have to pay any attention. I can just scoot by. It's not my problem. It's somebody else's problem. Okay, if you want to be a freaking coward and choose that, yep, you can choose that. Or if you want to help them, you can choose that. And if you want to help somebody and you go completely overboard and kill somebody when there was just sort of people mad at each other for something, the responsibility is on you. The responsibility is always on you for whatever you do. Now, I'm all in favor of people thinking ahead of time, well, what would be justified? What is the best way to settle disputes? Like if there's two people with properties out in the woods and they disagree about where the property line is, okay, what would be a good way to deal with that? You can think about that and you can read other people's opinions and you can decide whether to intervene. And if somebody, I'm just barging over and taking over your property, you can decide whether to help them and say, I think we all have to get together and that was obviously that guy's house and that guy invaded. We need to help him kick him out. And maybe we should even organize and cooperate so that we can call each other in a case like this and help defend each other. But even when you get into a cooperation situation, what you do, even if it's as part of a mob, is still on you. And unfortunately, a lot of people think, well, as long as other people are going along with it, I'm not to blame. They were all doing it too. That's not an excuse either. So the downside of this little rant is that there is no escape from personal responsibility. Trying to defer to an authority for what you do or don't do and pretending you're not responsible is a total lie. You're still responsible. So that's the bad news, is there's no way to get out of you being responsible for what you do or for what you don't do. The good news is that in a society where all the grown-ups accept that, even if they don't all know everything and they don't agree on everything, and a lot of them have stupid ideas and some of them get emotional and do dumb stuff without thinking it through first, even with all the faults and stupidity that can be in human beings, if you have a society of people where every individual accepts just the premise that he is responsible for whatever he does, you immediately have way more incentive for people to come up with moral, rational solutions instead of just running off and voting for some violent authoritarian solution to make the world work and take care of the poor and protect us and do all these things that, government ends up doing a horribly destructive job. Like it manages to drastically traumatize all of humanity even by taking care of the poor. It creates a welfare state of mostly discouraged, depressed, angry, unproductive, uneducated people. That if people were just being normal people and helping each other, you wouldn't get that outcome. And when it comes to protecting the innocent, government has this gang of thugs that does a really crappy job of protecting the innocent and a pretty good job of extorting and robbing perfectly decent people on a regular basis. If you don't believe me, ask yourself, how many times have you seen the cops saving the day against an actual criminal? Never. Once, if you're really lucky. And how many times have you seen the cops pulling somebody over for not having the right sticker and extorting a couple $100 from them? You all have seen that, and you know it. That's what they actually do. Now imagine if those people with badges and who imagine they're enforcers of the law were just people. You don't get your badge, you don't get the excuse of government and law and any of that crap. Now you're just a person. Now, you're still capable of doing all the good stuff that people can do as cops, like defending the innocent from aggressors, because anybody has the right to do that. The only thing that won't happen is you won't anymore be an aggressor and pretend it's okay because you were just following orders and enforcing the law. Because everybody, including you, will know what you do is on you. Just getting humanity to that point where every individual realizes, wow, what I do, that's my responsibility and nobody else's. I may get input, I may get ideas, I may read things, decide what I think, ponder different approaches, but at the end of the day, I own myself, I have judgment, I have free will, and I am responsible for what I do. Just getting people to that point would drastically improve humanity. Now, from that point, people can learn a lot more and get a lot better at it and come up with better solutions. But even if tomorrow people were still as ignorant as they are about how things work and haven't really thought things through, but are willing to accept responsibility for what they personally do, that would be a drastic improvement, and it's only uphill from there as people who have just started to carry the mantle of responsible adults learn how to actually do a good job of that. So what we need is all of humanity to stop thinking and acting like children, because every single person who believes in government behaves like a child, because all of them are in some way or another deferring to an imaginary authority to do what they don't have the spine to do themselves, what they don't want to take on the responsibility to decide for themselves. So the downside is, yeah, there's that heavy responsibility. You have to determine right from wrong for yourself. Nobody else can do that for you, and it's insane and anti-human for you to try to defer that to somebody else. So that's the downside. The plus side is human society will be 1,000 times better instantly when everybody just realizes that one simple reality, that every individual is always responsible for what he chooses to do.